"Touch me and you will know my secret," the Apache woman whispered to the cowboy. The sun was beginning to sink behind the jagged hills of the Arizona desert, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The air was dry and carried the faint scent of sagebrush and dust. James, a lone cowboy, rode slowly across the rugged land, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dirt. He was used to traveling alone. For years, he had wandered the frontier, moving from town to town, ranch to ranch, always searching for work, always moving. Loneliness had become a familiar companion, but he had grown used to it. It was a hard life, full of long days, endless miles, and nights under the open sky. Yet, he had learned to trust only himself and his horse, trusting few people in a world that was often unforgiving. As James rode, he noticed signs of life that did not belong to the usual wildlife. Small footprints in the soft soil, fresh markings on the trees, and faint smoke rising in the distance told him that someone else had been here recently. His instincts, sharpened by years on the trail, told him to be cautious. The frontier was not always kind, and strangers could mean danger, but something about the scene made him slow his horse. There was a sense of mystery in the air, something that made his heart beat a little faster. He had learned to read the land and its signs, and he knew when something, or someone, was near. By the time the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the desert floor, James reached a small clearing where a fire burned softly. The smoke curled into the air, disappearing into the darkening sky. He dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby cactus. The firelight flickered, revealing the outline of a woman standing just beyond its warmth. She was not like anyone he had ever seen before. Her clothing was made of soft, tanned leather, decorated with patterns that spoke of her people and her heritage. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders, and her eyes, deep and cautious, studied him from the shadows. There was a strength in her stance, a quiet confidence that made James pause. He had met many people in his travels, but something about her presence was different. It was commanding, yet fragile like a delicate flame in the desert wind. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the faint rustling of the desert leaves. Then, in a voice that was soft but carried an unmistakable strength, she spoke. "Touch me and you will know my secret," she whispered. The words were strange, almost like a riddle, and they sent a shiver down James's spine. He was a man who had faced danger, wild animals, and the harshness of nature, but he had never encountered anything like this. Her eyes did not show fear. They showed caution, curiosity, and a silent challenge. It was clear that she was not someone to be taken lightly, and yet there was a thread of trust in her voice, a trust she was offering to him alone. James hesitated. He was not a reckless man, and he understood that this woman carried her own history, one that was complicated and probably painful. He also knew that this moment could change everything: his journey, his path, perhaps even his understanding of life itself. Still, something about her drew him closer. He did not move hastily. He approached slowly, respecting the space between them. The firelight danced across his face and hers, highlighting the careful movements, the silent communication that passed between them without words. It was a delicate dance of trust and curiosity. The woman, whose name James would later learn was Nayeli, stepped slightly forward, enough to close some of the distance, but not so close as to seem desperate. Her eyes locked with his, searching, assessing, as if she were trying to see beyond the surface into the core of his being. James felt an unusual mix of anticipation and respect. He had encountered many challenges in his life, but this was different. This was not about survival, at least not in the physical sense. This was about understanding, about a connection that went beyond words and actions. It was about secrets, ones that were hidden deep within the heart. James finally sat near the fire, keeping a careful distance. He watched her as she moved, each motion precise and deliberate. She seemed comfortable in the wilderness, at home in a way he had rarely seen in anyone outside the desert itself. He noticed the way she handled the small bundle she carried with her, the careful attention to detail, the quiet strength in her hands. It was clear that she had lived a life full of challenges, and that she had learned to survive with skill, courage, and independence. He respected that immensely. Here was a woman who did not rely on anyone but herself, yet somehow she had invited him into her world with those simple, mysterious words. The desert night grew colder and the stars appeared, scattered across the sky like diamonds. The wind whispered through the canyons, and James felt a strange sense of calm amidst the tension. He realized that this encounter was rare, perhaps even life-changing. The woman's words, "Touch me and you will know my secret," echoed in his mind. He did not fully understand them yet, but he felt their weight. Secrets were not always easy to carry, and they could be dangerous. Yet there was a sense of honesty in her invitation, a willingness to reveal something deeply personal to someone she trusted, even if that trust was tentative and fragile. As the night wore on, James and Nayeli spoke for the first time, carefully and slowly, building a bridge between two very different lives. She told him fragments of her story, enough to hint at her past, her struggles, and the life she had led in the Apache lands. James shared some of his own experiences, the long journeys, the work he had done, and the loneliness that had followed him for so many years. They did not rush. There was no need. Each word, each glance was measured and meaningful. The connection between them grew quietly, without force, yet with a profound intensity that neither of them could ignore. By the time the fire had burned low and the desert had fallen silent, James understood that this was only the beginning. Nayeli's secret was not something to be taken lightly, and he knew that trust would need to be earned. Yet there was a bond forming, fragile but undeniable. He felt the weight of responsibility, the curiosity, and a strange sense of destiny. Somehow, in this harsh and unforgiving land, two souls had met, and the ripple of that encounter promised to change the course of both their lives. And though James did not yet know what the secret fully entailed, he was determined to stay, to learn, and to see the truth that Nayeli carried with her, hidden beneath the strength and resilience of a woman shaped by her past and her land. The desert night held them in its quiet embrace, two figures bound by curiosity, caution, and the silent promise of revelation. As the stars watched above, James felt the first true stirrings of understanding, that life was not only about survival, but about the moments of connection that made survival meaningful. And in that moment, he realized that whatever lay ahead, whatever secrets Nayeli held, he would face them with an open mind, a steady heart, and the respect that her courage demanded. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting golden light across the jagged rocks and sparse vegetation. James woke to the quiet sound of the wind brushing through the sagebrush. His horse nickered softly, and the smell of the desert morning filled the air. As he rubbed his eyes, he noticed Nayeli sitting nearby, staring into the distance, her face calm but thoughtful. There was a quiet strength about her that James could not stop noticing. She seemed at ease in a way he rarely saw in anyone. It was clear she belonged to this land, and yet she carried an invisible weight, a hidden story that her eyes only hinted at. The fire from the night before had burned down to ashes, and the desert was waking slowly around them. James approached her cautiously. "You've been through a lot," he said softly, unsure of how else to begin. Nayeli turned to him, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment no words were spoken. Then she nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a truth that was hard to say aloud. Her life, James realized, had been shaped by hardship, loss, and survival. He could see it in her eyes, the quiet sorrow, the careful watchfulness, and the strength she had built to keep going, day after day. Over the next few hours, as the sun climbed higher, Nayeli began to open up, sharing parts of her life cautiously. She told James about the people she had loved and lost, about her family who had been taken from her by violence that had no mercy. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of grief, memories that had stayed with her for years. She spoke of wandering through the desert, learning to survive alone, finding water, food, and shelter in a land that was unforgiving to anyone who was unprepared. Every word painted a picture of resilience, a life forged in both pain and wisdom. James listened intently. He had known hardship too, long days working on ranches, lonely nights under the stars, and the constant uncertainty of the frontier. But Nayeli's experiences were different. They were raw, dangerous, and carried the echoes of a world that had tried to break her spirit. Yet she had survived, not through luck, but through courage, intelligence, and careful planning. He began to understand that her whispered secret from the night before was not something simple. It was something deeper, something that required trust and respect. It was the story of her life, shaped by struggle and endurance. As the morning passed, James and Nayeli began to work together to prepare for the day. They gathered firewood, tended to the horse, and planned their route across the desert. The tasks were simple, but they allowed both of them to observe and learn about each other. James noticed how efficient Nayeli was. Every movement had a purpose, every action precise. She moved with confidence and awareness, as though the desert itself were an extension of her body. He admired her skill, realizing that her strength was not only physical but also mental. She had learned to read the land, to anticipate danger, and to protect herself in ways he had never seen before. Nayeli, in turn, observed James closely. She saw his calm determination, the way he thought before he acted, and the quiet patience that had allowed him to survive on his own for so long. Unlike many men she had encountered, he did not rush. He did not assume he understood her or her life. He simply listened, observed, and respected her boundaries. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of trust. For the first time in years, she sensed that someone could understand her, not just her words, but her fears, her strength, and her story. It was a fragile trust, but it was growing. By midday, the sun was high and the desert shimmered with heat. They stopped near a small, hidden spring, where water trickled quietly among the rocks. Nayeli knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands and drinking deeply. She motioned for James to do the same, and he followed, feeling the refreshing coolness wash over him. It was a small moment, but it carried meaning. In the desert, water was life, and sharing it was a sign of trust and understanding. James realized that these small acts were revealing more about Nayeli than words ever could. Her secret was not only about what had happened to her, but about who she was, how she lived, and the care she took to survive with dignity. As they rested, Nayeli told James more about her past. She spoke of her family and tribe, the ways of the Apache people, their traditions and their struggles. She described a life that was deeply connected to the land, where every animal, plant, and rock had significance. She spoke of the challenges of living in a world where outsiders often brought danger, and how her people had learned to navigate that danger with wisdom and courage. James listened, fascinated. He realized that he was not only learning about Nayeli, but also about a culture that had survived against incredible odds. He felt honored that she was sharing this knowledge with him. Despite the calm moments, the conversation often returned to the hardships she had faced. Nayeli spoke of times when she had been alone, hungry, and unsure if she would survive another day. She had learned to rely on herself, to trust her instincts, and to never give up, no matter how difficult the situation. James admired her resilience, recognizing that her strength had been earned through experience, not given freely. He felt a growing respect and a desire to protect and honor the trust she was placing in him by sharing her story. Her secret, he realized, was not a simple mystery. It was a testament to the power of survival, courage, and wisdom gained through struggle. As the afternoon sun began to lower, they continued their journey across the desert. James helped Naomi navigate tricky paths, over rocks and through narrow canyons, while she taught him how to observe the land, where to find hidden water, and how to read the signs of animals and weather. The lessons were practical, but they also carried deeper meaning. Every step they took together built a bond, not just of companionship, but of mutual respect and understanding. James could see the layers of Naomi's character unfolding, her intelligence, her independence, and the subtle ways she had learned to protect herself from the harshness of the world. By evening, they reached a small plateau with a view of the valley below. The sun was setting, painting the sky with colors that seemed almost unreal. They sat quietly, watching the shadows stretch across the land. James felt a sense of awe, not only for the beauty of the desert but for the woman beside him, who had survived so much and yet remained open enough to share her story. Naomi looked at him and smiled faintly, a smile that carried both warmth and sadness. It was a smile of trust, a small acknowledgement that she was beginning to allow him into her life, even in a limited way. The night grew darker, and stars filled the sky, twinkling above like silent witnesses. They made camp near a cluster of rocks that offered some protection from the wind. As James prepared the fire, Naomi moved with quiet confidence, arranging the small area, checking their supplies, and making sure they were safe for the night. There was a rhythm to their actions, an unspoken understanding developing between them. It was not yet friendship, but it was the foundation of one. Trust was slowly being built, brick by brick, through shared work, shared silence, and shared understanding. Before sleeping, James asked Naomi about her whispered secret from the night before. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and said, "It is not something I can tell quickly. It is my story, my life, and it cannot be shared lightly. You must see it, understand it, and respect it." James nodded. He understood that this secret was not a simple story to hear but a life to witness. It was a test of patience, respect, and care. He realized that the journey ahead would not only reveal her secret, but also teach him lessons about courage, empathy, and the complexities of life in the desert. He felt a mix of anticipation and responsibility, a feeling he had never experienced before. As the fire burned down, they lay under the stars, each lost in their own thoughts. James thought about the trust Naomi had begun to place in him, and Naomi thought about the cautious hope she felt in sharing even small parts of her life. The desert night was quiet, almost sacred, and it held them both in its calm embrace. In those moments, the connection between them deepened, unspoken yet profound. It was clear that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, step by step, story by story, learning from each other as the desert watched silently above. Days passed as James and Naomi traveled together across the desert. Each morning, the rising sun painted the sky in colors that seemed too beautiful to be real, and each night, the stars stretched endlessly above them, quiet witnesses to their growing bond. At first, their companionship had been cautious, filled with silent observations and careful conversations. But now, after days of shared travel, trust began to grow between them. They had learned to rely on one another, not just for survival but for understanding and companionship. In a harsh and unforgiving land, that was no small thing. Naomi showed James the secrets of the desert, the hidden springs where water could always be found, the paths animals took that led to food, and the small signs in the rocks and sand that foretold storms or danger. James listened intently, amazed by her knowledge. He had spent years in the frontier, surviving on his own, but Naomi's wisdom was different. It was precise, born of experience, observation, and necessity. Every lesson she shared seemed like a key to a world that James had always sensed but never fully understood. He realized that he was not only learning about survival, he was learning about life itself, through her eyes. As they moved from one canyon to another, James shared his own experiences, telling her about the long days he had spent riding cattle, the lonely nights by campfires, and the friends he had lost along the way. Naomi listened carefully, nodding occasionally, but she did not interrupt. She seemed to understand that his life had shaped him in ways similar to her own experiences. Both had faced hardships and solitude, though their worlds were very different. That shared understanding created a silent connection, a bridge between two lives that might otherwise have remained completely separate. One afternoon, they rested by the edge of a dry riverbed. The sun was high, and the heat shimmered across the sand. James took the time to observe Naomi as she moved. She had a way of handling everything with care. The way she cleaned their small campsite, tended to their supplies, and checked the horse. There was no rush, no panic, only careful, deliberate action. He realized that every movement she made was shaped by years of experience and necessity. This was a woman who had learned to survive, yes, but also someone who had learned to respect the world around her, to read it carefully, and to move through it wisely. Naomi noticed James studying her. She smiled faintly, a small, knowing smile that seemed to say, "I see you noticing, and that is okay." She began to share more of her past, telling him stories about her family, her tribe, and the traditions they held dear. She spoke of celebrations, dances, and the quiet moments of teaching children how to survive in the desert. She spoke of the balance her people held with nature, taking only what they needed and showing respect to every creature, plant, and rock. James was fascinated. He had heard bits and pieces of stories about the Apache before, but hearing them from someone who had lived that life made it real, vivid, and deeply moving. Over time, they also shared lighter moments. They laughed when James tried, and failed, to copy Naomi's skill in finding edible plants, and Naomi chuckled when James demonstrated some of his own cowboy tricks. These small moments of laughter were precious. In a world where danger and survival were always near, finding space to smile was rare. It reminded them that life was not only about enduring hardships, but also about enjoying the small victories and joys. Those moments drew them closer, building a bond that went beyond mere survival. However, their journey was not without tension. Both carried scars, emotional and physical, that made it difficult to fully trust each other at times. James sometimes felt frustration at the constant caution Naomi displayed, not realizing it was born from years of needing to protect herself. Naomi occasionally wondered if James could truly understand the depth of her life experiences, if he could grasp the hardships of her past. Yet, they navigated these moments carefully, never allowing them to break the trust that was slowly forming. They learned patience, the art of listening, and the importance of respecting boundaries. One evening, after a particularly long day crossing rocky terrain, they found shelter under a small cliff. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting shadows across the land. James worked on starting a small fire while Naomi prepared some food she had gathered earlier. As they ate, the conversation turned personal. Naomi shared her deepest fear, the fear of losing the people she trusted, the fear that solitude might become permanent again. James listened quietly, feeling a sense of responsibility. He did not offer empty words, only his presence and attention, which spoke louder than anything he could say. He realized that trust was fragile, and this moment required care. Naomi's secret, the one she had whispered about the night they first met, began to feel less like a mystery and more like a journey James had been invited to join. Each story, each lesson, and each shared silence revealed parts of her life and character. He saw her resilience, her intelligence, her wisdom, and her compassion. He realized that her secret was not a single thing but a combination of everything she had lived through and learned. It was the essence of who she was, a woman shaped by hardship, courage, and survival. As the fire crackled and the desert cooled, They talked about dreams and hopes. James admitted that he often wondered if he would ever find a place to belong, a home where he could feel safe and understood. Naomi spoke quietly about her own longing, not for material things but for safety, for understanding, and for connection with people who would not harm her or her tribe. Their dreams were different, yet the longing behind them was the same. In that quiet desert evening, a new level of understanding developed between them. They were no longer strangers. They were companions, sharing a journey that was as much about learning from each other as it was about survival. The night deepened and the stars shone brightly overhead. James and Naomi lay near the fire, each lost in thought. He thought about the strength she carried, the wisdom she had gained, and the courage it took for her to live in such a world. Naomi thought about the cautious hope she felt, the rare trust she was beginning to place in someone after years of relying only on herself. They did not need to speak. The connection was clear. Trust was being built not through words alone, but through shared experiences, shared struggles, and shared respect. In the days that followed, they continued their journey, facing the challenges of the desert together. They encountered sudden storms, scorching heat, and difficult terrain, but they also found hidden valleys, springs of fresh water, and moments of breathtaking beauty. Each challenge taught them something new about the other. Each discovery brought moments of awe and wonder. They began to understand that their bond was not just about surviving the desert. It was about understanding, respecting, and valuing each other as individuals shaped by very different lives, but connected by shared experiences. Through it all, James realized that Naomi's secret, whispered in the first night by the fire, was slowly revealing itself not as a single revelation but as a journey. It was in her resilience, in the lessons she taught, in the wisdom she shared, and in the trust she began to place in him. He felt honored to be part of this journey, not as a savior, but as a companion, someone willing to witness her life, respect her story, and walk beside her in a world that often demanded solitude for survival. By the time the sun began to set once again, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, James and Naomi reached a small plateau. They sat together in quiet companionship, the wind brushing against their faces. In that moment, James understood something important. The journey was far from over, and their bond would continue to grow stronger through trials, challenges, and shared experiences. Naomi's secret was not just a story, it was a life, and he was privileged to see it unfold. The trust she had placed in him was a gift, one he vowed to honor and protect as they continued their journey across the vast, untamed desert. The next morning, the desert air was crisp, and the sun had just begun to climb over the horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. James and Naomi had risen early, as was their routine, preparing for another day of travel. The silence of the desert was both comforting and tense, as it often carried the promise of beauty and the risk of danger. As they moved cautiously through a narrow canyon, Naomi paused, her eyes scanning the rocks and sand with intense focus. James, noticing her alertness, followed her gaze. Something had changed. He could feel it in the air, a subtle shift that warned of trouble ahead. Suddenly, in the distance, the sound of hooves broke the calm. A small band of men rode swiftly across the desert floor, their movements aggressive and purposeful. James and Naomi froze. From the look of their clothing and the dust trailing behind them, it was clear these were outsiders, settlers who had come to claim land that did not belong to them. Naomi's eyes narrowed, and James felt the tension rise in his chest. The frontier was harsh, and encounters like this could quickly become deadly. Yet, James also knew that these men posed a threat not just to them, but to the land and people Naomi represented. Without a word, Naomi led James along a hidden path she knew well. It was narrow and rocky, weaving through the canyon in a way that kept them out of sight. James followed closely, trusting her instincts and skill. She moved silently, her experience evident in every careful step. James admired her ability to remain calm under pressure, and he realized that her whispered secret, the one that had intrigued him from the beginning, was deeply connected to this skill, this awareness, and this ability to survive in situations where most people would falter. Naomi's life had been shaped by danger, and now that training was proving invaluable. As they moved, Naomi explained in quiet tones how to read the land for signs of danger. "Listen," she whispered, "the desert tells stories if you know how to hear them. Watch the sand, the rocks, even the wind. It warns you of those who would harm you." James listened, absorbing every detail. He had relied on instinct for years, but Naomi's guidance added layers of understanding he had never known. Each step they took together strengthened the bond between them, a silent agreement that they would face whatever came next side by side. The sound of the settlers grew louder, and soon they were close enough that James could see their intent. The men were armed, riding fast, and clearly looking for something, or someone. James glanced at Naomi, who remained calm but alert. He realized that this moment would test both of them in ways they had never experienced. Survival was not just about physical skill. It was about courage, trust, and understanding one another in the midst of fear. Naomi's secret, James thought, was not just a story or skill. It was her ability to remain strong, composed, and intelligent when everything around her was chaotic. Suddenly, one of the settlers spotted them. A shout rang out, echoing across the canyon walls. The horsemen began to gallop toward them, their intentions clear. James and Naomi had no time to hesitate. Naomi grabbed James's arm and pulled him toward a narrow rock crevice she had spotted earlier. They squeezed into the space just as the settlers passed by, unaware of the two figures hidden in plain sight. James held his breath, amazed by Naomi's knowledge of the terrain and her ability to anticipate danger. She had turned what could have been a deadly encounter into a temporary escape, and he felt both relief and admiration for her courage. Once the immediate danger passed, they continued their journey, moving carefully to avoid further detection. James noticed that Naomi's movements were deliberate but quick, each step calculated to keep them safe. She whispered advice, teaching him how to move quietly, how to blend with the shadows, and how to anticipate threats before they appeared. It was an intense lesson, one that demanded focus, trust, and respect. James realized that surviving the desert was about more than knowing the land. It was about understanding people, anticipating intentions, and reacting with intelligence and courage. As the day wore on, they found temporary shelter in a small hidden canyon. They shared a quiet meal, their hands moving efficiently as they prepared food and tended to their horse. There was no time for fear to take hold. The desert required constant awareness. Yet in the quiet moments between tasks, James and Naomi shared small stories, laughter, and observations. These moments of connection were precious, a reminder that even in the face of danger, life could hold beauty and companionship. James felt a deepening respect for Naomi, not just for her survival skills, but for her wisdom, courage, and humanity. Despite the intensity of the day, they also found moments to reflect. Naomi spoke softly about the challenges her people had faced over generations, about the resilience needed to survive not just in the desert, but in a world that often sought to take from them. James listened, understanding more and more that her whispered secret from the first night was tied to every experience she had lived, every lesson she had learned, and every decision she had made to survive. Her life was a map of courage, strategy, and careful observation, and he felt privileged to witness it. As evening fell, the sky filled with brilliant colors and the desert cooled. James and Naomi prepared to rest for the night, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges. They found a sheltered spot between two large boulders, hidden from view and protected from the wind. James worked on starting a small fire while Naomi checked their surroundings, ensuring they were safe. Her attention to detail, calm presence, and unwavering focus reminded James that the desert was not just a place of survival, but a test of intelligence, patience, and trust. He realized that this journey was shaping him as much as it was showcasing Naomi's abilities. Later, as the fire crackled and the stars began to appear, James and Naomi spoke quietly about the day's events. He asked her how she had learned to survive so well, how she had anticipated the settlers' attack, and how she had remained calm under such pressure. Naomi looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and smiled faintly. "I have had to learn," she said softly, "because survival does not come by chance. It comes by observing, listening, and respecting the land and the people who walk it. Every danger teaches you something. Every challenge strengthens you." James nodded, understanding that this was more than a lesson about survival. It was a lesson about life, trust, and resilience. That night, as they lay near the fire, James thought about how far their journey had come. He had entered this desert as a solitary traveler, cautious and wary, and now he was walking alongside someone whose wisdom, courage, and secret strength had changed the way he viewed the world. Naomi's whispered words from the first night, "Touch me and you will know my secret," had not been about physical touch alone. They had been an invitation to witness her life, understand her experiences, and share a bond built on trust, respect, and shared endurance. It was a secret of resilience, patience, and survival, and James felt privileged to be a part of it. The desert was quiet, the only sounds the wind rustling through the rocks and the faint movements of animals in the distance. In that quiet, James and Naomi rested, preparing for the days ahead. They knew that danger was never far in this land, but they also knew that together they could face whatever came their way. The bond between them had grown stronger, built not only on shared survival, but also on understanding, respect, and the quiet acknowledgement of each other's strengths. Naomi's secret had revealed itself gradually, not as a single moment, but as a living, breathing presence in every decision, every movement, and every action she took. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared, painting the sky with pale shades of pink and gold, James felt a sense of awe. He had seen danger, he had seen courage, and he had seen the strength of a woman who had survived the harshest conditions imaginable. Naomi had shared her world with him, taught him lessons that no book or town could provide, and offered him a glimpse into the heart of a life shaped by survival, wisdom, and trust. He realized that their journey was far from over, but the challenges they had faced together had already forged a bond that would endure, a bond built on understanding, respect, and the shared experience of overcoming danger in a vast and unforgiving land. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting long golden streaks across the rocks and sand. James and Naomi awoke to the quiet sounds of the desert stirring around them, the soft whisper of the wind through the canyons, the faint chirping of birds, and the gentle rustle of leaves on the sparse bushes. They had survived days of travel, challenges, and danger, and yet the bond between them had grown stronger with each passing hour. They were no longer strangers or cautious travelers. They were companions, each relying on the other, learning from each other, and growing together in trust and understanding. As they packed their small camp and prepared to continue their journey, James thought about all that had happened. He remembered the day they first met, when Naomi had whispered those mysterious words, "Touch me and you will know my secret." At the time, he had not understood what she meant. Now, after days of walking, sharing stories, and facing dangers together, he realized that her secret was not a single event or a simple truth. It was her life itself. It was her courage, her wisdom, and the strength she carried from years of hardship and survival. Her secret was the essence of who she was, and James felt honored that she had allowed him to witness it. Naomi led the way, her movements sure and precise, as they made their way across a rocky plateau. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a mix of challenges and beauty. She taught James more about the signs of the land, how to see where water might be hidden, how to notice subtle changes in the weather, and how to anticipate the movements of animals and humans alike. Each lesson revealed a little more of her secret, showing him not just how to survive, but how to observe, respect, and understand the world around them. James listened carefully, knowing that every detail mattered and that every lesson was a gift of trust from Naeli. As they walked, James began to notice small things about Naeli that he had not before. The way she moved with quiet confidence, the way her eyes seemed to take in every detail of the landscape, and the way she approached challenges calmly and deliberately. He realized that her strength was not just in her survival skills, but in her intelligence, patience, and understanding of life itself. She had faced danger and hardship that most people could not imagine, yet she had survived, and in surviving, she had learned to live fully, to respect life, and to protect herself and those she cared about. Her secret, James thought, was the combination of all these qualities, woven together over years of experience. By midday, they reached a hidden valley where the land was lush with life, a rare oasis in the harsh desert. Water trickled through a small stream, plants grew in abundance, and the air felt cooler and more refreshing. Naeli smiled softly, as if sharing a private joy with James. She told him that this valley was one of the few places she had discovered where life thrived despite the harshness of the desert. It was a reminder that even in the most difficult places, hope and beauty could exist. James felt a sense of wonder and gratitude, not only for the beauty of the valley, but also for the guidance and wisdom that Naeli had shared with him. As they rested by the stream, James asked Naeli more about her life before they met, wanting to understand her completely, to know the full depth of her secret. Naeli spoke quietly, telling him about her family, her tribe, and the traditions they held. She spoke of the joys she had experienced, the celebrations, the dances, and the quiet moments of teaching children how to survive in the desert. She also spoke of the sorrows, the losses, the dangers, and the times she had had to be alone. Through her words, James began to understand that her secret was not a burden but a source of strength, a combination of everything she had learned, endured, and achieved in her life. As the day went on, they continued their journey, moving carefully but with purpose. The desert presented challenges: a sudden sandstorm, rocky paths, and the constant need to find water and food. But James and Naeli faced them together. Each obstacle strengthened their bond, showing them that trust, cooperation, and mutual respect were as important as skill and strength. Naeli's secret was no longer a mysterious whisper. It was alive in her actions, in the way she moved, in the lessons she shared, and in the courage she showed every day. James felt a deep respect for her, realizing that witnessing her life and learning from her experiences was a rare and valuable gift. As evening approached, they reached a small plateau overlooking a vast valley. The sky was painted with shades of pink, orange, and purple, reflecting off the rocks and sand below. They sat together in quiet reflection, watching the sunset. James thought about all that he had learned, not just about survival, but about life, courage, and trust. Naeli's secret, he realized, was not something that could be simply told. It had to be seen, experienced, and understood. It was in the way she faced danger, the way she treated the land, the way she trusted him, and the way she carried herself with dignity and strength despite all she had endured. Naeli turned to James and spoke softly. "My secret," she said, "is not something I can give to anyone. It is my life, my choices, my courage, and my survival. To know it, you must walk with me, share my experiences, and see the world through my eyes." James nodded, understanding completely. He realized that the journey they had shared, the challenges they had faced together, and the lessons they had learned were all part of knowing her secret. It was a living, breathing truth, shaped by experience, wisdom, and strength. The night fell, and the desert was bathed in moonlight. They made camp near a cluster of rocks that offered shelter and warmth. As they sat by the fire, they spoke quietly about the future. James knew that his journey with Naomi was not just about travel or survival. It was about understanding life in its fullest sense. Naomi knew that she could trust him, that he respected her experiences and her strength. Their friendship, built slowly through shared hardships, had grown into something deep and unspoken, a bond that neither words nor distance could easily break. As they rested, James thought about how much he had changed since meeting Naomi. He had entered the desert as a solitary man, cautious and wary, but now he was walking alongside someone whose wisdom, courage, and secret strength had reshaped the way he viewed the world. He had learned patience, observation, respect, and the true meaning of trust. Naomi had shared her life with him in a way that few people could, revealing not just her survival skills but her heart, her courage, and her understanding of the world. In the following days, they traveled together with care, facing challenges and finding moments of beauty and wonder. They encountered small wildlife, hidden springs, and breathtaking views, all of which Naomi pointed out with pride and knowledge. James observed her closely, learning from her every move, and realizing that the desert, which had once felt harsh and unyielding, was now a place of life, lessons, and shared experience. Naomi's secret had become clear. It was not just a story of survival, but a guide to living fully, observing carefully, and trusting wisely. Eventually, their journey brought them to the edge of the desert, where the land began to open into forests and rivers, signaling the end of this stage of their adventure. They paused, looking at the horizon together. James felt a mixture of awe, gratitude, and a quiet sadness, knowing that their journey was ending but that the bond they had formed would endure. Naomi turned to him and smiled softly, a smile filled with understanding, trust, and respect. She knew that her secret had been witnessed, honored, and respected, and that James had learned the lessons embedded within it. As they parted ways, James realized that he had been forever changed. Naomi had shared with him something rare and profound, not a simple secret, but a life shaped by courage, wisdom, and experience. He had seen her strengths, her struggles, and her resilience, and he carried that knowledge with him. Naomi, in turn, continued her journey, knowing that she had trusted someone who truly understood her, someone who would honor her secret even in her absence. Their bond was unspoken but unbreakable, a connection formed through shared experiences, challenges, and understanding. In the quiet of the desert, James watched Naomi disappear into the distance, feeling a deep sense of respect and gratitude. He knew that life would never be quite the same for him again. The lessons she had taught, the courage she had shown, and the trust she had offered would remain with him forever. Naomi's secret was no longer a mystery. It was a living truth, experienced and understood, and it had left an indelible mark on his life. The desert, once a place of loneliness and challenge, had become a place of learning, growth, and profound connection. That night, under a sky filled with stars, James camped alone, reflecting on the journey he had shared with Naomi. He realized that the greatest lessons were not about survival alone, but about understanding, trust, and the quiet strength of people who had endured life's greatest challenges. Naomi's secret was not just hers. It was a lesson for anyone willing to see, listen, and learn. And in that understanding, James found a new sense of purpose, respect, and hope for the days ahead.